This lecture is going to cover the basics of development of the vestibular system in children, as well as the development of related motor control. By the end, you should have a basic knowledge of the process of developing postural stability and eye movement control. This entails learning about primitive writing reflexes and development of vestibular nystagmus and eye movement and control in children. Quick review from previous lectures, the ability to balance and maintain postural control involves multiple sensory systems, primarily including the visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive systems. These feed inputs into the central nervous system, which then responds by controlling eye movement and postural muscles, which leads to balance. Dysfunction of any of these systems can lead to imbalance and dizziness. The nature of whatever imbalance or dizziness we see can help clinicians pinpoint the areas of dysfunction, which we'll cover in the diagnostic lectures. So here's a little bit more detail about the process of balance control. Sensory input from the primary balance senses is integrated centrally in both subcortical and cortical levels of the brain. The integrated input is then used to control movements of the postural muscles and eyes in order to allow us to balance. Balance does also include feed-forward and feedback loops, so once a motor plan is activated, the sensory systems then detect the effects of the motor plan and the cycle repeats continuously. This cycle is continuously looping in order for us to maintain stability. Childhood development is broken down into various periods, as you can see here. The ages may change a little bit depending on the source you're looking at. These are the generally accepted periods. There's also a good bit of variation in children, so some may spend more time in one than another. Also keep in mind that there are no hard lines between them. These are more like areas on a continuum. At birth, the vestibular system is anatomically fully developed. All the macro and microstructures in the labyrinth are fully developed and functioning. This includes the brainstem pathway. By birth, the innervation of this pathway is fully formed. At birth, we can see evidence for postural control even if the infant is unable to support themselves. In order to develop postural control, infants need to have sensory input related to head position and movement. They do demonstrate some visual control related to position, including gaze stabilization and head stabilization. Head control at this stage appears to be visually driven. Interaction between the eyes and head support various primitive writing reflexes, including the tonic labyrinthine reflex. Visual input is also used for mapping the position of the hands and feet in the environment. By being able to see the position of limbs, infants can then use this information to map the proprioceptive inputs that they are receiving. While infants are unable to influence their balance in some cases, primitive reflexes show that they do react to changes in position. The fully formed vestibular system allows infants to respond to positional changes as evidenced by them aligning their heads to gravity while held in various positions. In the infant's vestibular function can be demonstrated using cold water calorics. The response is different than in adults, as the caloric elicits a tonic deviation of the eyes, which means the eyes move away from the stimulated ear, but will not be as in normal nystagmus. The tonic deviation can also be demonstrated with rotation. I've mentioned some of the primitive reflexes. If you're unclear about them, these videos provide good demonstrations of them as seen in infants, so if you are unclear, I'd suggest checking these videos out for yourself. Looking at motor development, this chart gives a brief outline of various major gross motor development stages. This goes from unable to support to basic levels of support to rolling over and sitting to pulling up behaviors and crawling all the way up to walking. As with just about everything in development, there are wide ranges in these motor milestones that are considered normal. One child may be somewhat earlier or later and still be considered normal. And obviously, motor development does not stop when the child begins walking, so here are a few more of those milestones going up to about 30 months. Keep in mind as we talk about motor development, we're assuming that the child has normal vestibular, visual, skeletal motor, and central anatomy and function. Any abnormalities will alter the development of motor milestones. At 6 weeks, infants have some ability to follow objects, although their smooth pursuit is far from mature. Nystagmus can be elicited using an optokinetic stimulus, and vestibular nystagmus is beginning to appear. After 3 months, integration of visual and proprioceptive inputs are allowing more control demonstrated by reaching behaviors. The infant can support their head more and will hold it in relation to gravity. At this point, the parachute reaction begins to appear. It is exactly what it sounds like. In response to a sudden loss of support, the infant will spread their arms and legs as if they're skydiving. After 6 months, the propping reaction is seen. And this is while sitting, the child will use an arm to stabilize when they tip over. The child can be unbalanced with the parent movement around them. At 18 months, the child should be walking. This is considered the edge of the normal range for walking. Any delay beyond this may be considered abnormal. At 3 years, children have better postural stability with their eyes closed than open, although they can still be unbalanced with a moving surround. The base of support is large. If you've ever seen a 3-year-old walk, their feet are wide apart, leading to that characteristic toddle that you see at that age. They do initiate corrective movements, but they tend to be late and inaccurate. Caloric stimulation does lead to a fast phase of nystagmus, but the amplitude is very large and the frequency is low, at least when compared to adults. By 6 years, further integration of the visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive systems lead to postural control being the same with the eyes open or closed. Skeletal changes in the lower limbs and hips do lead to some increased instability at this age. At 8 years, sensory integration continues to develop and stability increases. Children should be able to be taught how to ride a bike at this point. Jumping up to 18 years, by this point smooth pursuit is mature, caloric responses look like those from adults, and postural stability is at or near its peak. As mentioned before, these milestones do rely on normal anatomy and physiology of various systems. Any impairments of these systems will affect this timeline. As with the development of other abilities such as speech, even in the presence of normal function and anatomy, sensory input is still required for normal development. Anything that deprives the children of sensory input due to either sensory abnormalities or external circumstances will also delay development. Middle ear disease, which is common in children, can also lead to temporary delays and disordered balance until it's resolved. A challenge in assessing children is that their abilities are constantly developing, so we need to know where they are on the timeline of normal progression in order to identify if the child has a problem at the particular point in which we're assessing them.